Hello, my name is Brittany Kavinsky, and I just want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 p.m., so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today on January 13th, we will have our presentation on community mobility given by Ken Hughes. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box, and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. Here's a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible. As you can see, we have quite a few webcasts scheduled for the beginning of this year. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcasts and register for your webcast of choice. We are now offering distance education webcasts to help you get your ethics and law credits. These webcasts are available to view at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. You can now follow us on Twitter at Planning Webcast or like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast Series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM, select today's date, January 13th, and then select today's webcast, Community Mobility. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are recording today's webcast, and it will be available along with a 6-slide per page PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Ken Hughes. Ken Hughes works at New Mexico's Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, where he manages the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Program. He chairs the Conservation Committee of the Rio Grande chapter of the Sierra Club and also chairs Santa Fe's Planning Commission. From 1993 to 2007, he headed the planning section at New Mexico's Local Government Division. Hughes received New Mexico's Professional Planner of the Year Award in 1997, a fellowship at the Knight Program in Community Building at the University of Miami in 2001, and a charter membership in the ZIA chapter of Lambda Alpha International in 2005. November 16, 2007 was named Ken Hughes Day in New Mexico for his support of local government planning. His 2006 blueprint for Santa Fe was named by Smart City Radio as a model for cities around the world. Hughes was a speaker at the 2008 Oslo Conference on Climate Change and the Urban Forum, and he attended the 2009 Copenhagen Climate Change Conference. Let's welcome Ken Hughes.
Thank you, Brittany. Is it audible?
Yeah, we can hear you. Just waiting on your slides.
All right. So I hit the show my screen?
Yep.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you, Brittany. And thanks to the Mid-Region Council of Governments here in Albuquerque for physically hosting this webinar. Today's topic is community mobility, and I'm glad to start the year's webinar sessions for the various APA chapter sponsors. We planners are tasked to take the long view. Comprehensive plans performed by communities typically have a 20-year horizon. So let's look out 20 years to the year 2032, when oil scarcity, cost, and environmental damage may make its use as a transport fuel the exception rather than the norm.
Ken, we're still waiting on your slides. If you can just click show my screen.
Okay. So hit the arrow on the left. No. That arrow. Yep. And what should we be hitting, Brittany?
It should be on the webinar toolbar, a little blue play button.
Blue play button.
Yeah.
That one. Click that. Technical difficulties. Now they can't see the screen. You need to click the toolbar The blue bar with the arrow, Brittany? Sorry, folks.
Yeah, it's a little blue circle button with a white play, little triangle play button. It says show my screen. It's on the top of your toolbar underneath screen sharing.
Oh, attendance audience view?
It should be titled screen sharing.
Okay, it doesn't want to keep opening, but she's trying. Does it work?
Yep, it's up now. Great.
All right. Sorry about that, folks. So anyhow, this webinar does address movement within a community. What will mobility look like in the year 2032 as we shift from a local transportation system dependent on the automobile to a scenario dominated by what I call community mobility?
Put your mic on. Okay. Hold on. Oh, maybe because they have control. I'll have to advance to move there. Hold on.
So we're now going to advance the slides. We want to go back to the future as was manifest in America by the 1939 World's Fair, where their vision of the future was shown by the General Motors exhibit, a hugely popular place in the New York World's Fair. They showed a city of high-rises, all accessed by the automobile, and we've embraced that vision and then some. Today, we Americans drive to the subplanet Pluto and back every day. By some estimates, we offer 8 parking spaces for every car in America. So with 250 million cars, that's 2 billion parking spaces. We planners have zoned in parking and street standards to accommodate this one form of mobility. But unwittingly or not, we tend to downplay or even exclude all other ways of getting around. By the way, the photo on the upper right is of St. Michael's Drive in my hometown of Santa Fe. And we'll go back to that street at the end of the webinar. Next slide. Well, driving promises to offer us quite a bit, including getting in and out of wedding chapel without having to get out of the car. So we can stay in the car till death do us part. And used car lots may be ugly. They also promise to be honest, but till transmission does its part. But the honest truth is we can do better. Next slide. As one wag put it, the car is a great servant but a lousy master. 21st century America is yet just flirted with alternatives to the automobile. What will it take for Lady Liberty to fully embrace the bus, the bike, the sidewalk? Next. In 1986, Michael Replogle and I co-founded the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy in Washington. We started by recklessly and audaciously donating bikes to Nicaragua, Haiti, and Mozambique, and went from there to policy, where we try to transform how places like the World Bank spend their money on transportation. So lately, it really embraced alternatives such as bus rapid transit, and we'll talk about that later. The Institute recently laid out 10 principles of sustainable transport. I'll go through each one of them and weave them into the community mobility options laid out in this webinar. The first option that the Institute wants to recognize, obviously, is to walk the talk, create great pedestrian environments. So the photo on the left is Delray Beach, Florida, which last February, that's every February, they host the Garlic Fest, where you too can get garlic in your ice cream. And it's a wonderful place to walk around and experience rubbing elbows with fest goers. You know, at Otavalo, Ecuador, people love walking through their Plaza Mayor, the main plaza in downtown Otavalo, every day for their everyday needs. Second principle is powered by people. we need to create a great environment for bicycles and other non-motorized vehicles. So in Freiburg, they've really put in incredible system of bike infrastructure, like this bike bridge over a river downtown. And the Parisian mayor, Paris's mayor, has done great strides to close off streets on weekends in the summer in Paris and allow people to rollerblade and bike throughout the whole city. Third principle is to get on the bus and provide great cost-effective public transport that the bus is done in thousands of cities around the world. Fourth is cruise control, that is to provide access for clean passenger vehicles at safe speeds and in significantly reduced numbers, which means offering electric vehicles such as this boutique hotel does in Copenhagen on the left, and in San Diego offering a flex car, which when shared can cut the number of parking spaces needed by 12 to 13 according to some estimates. Fifth principle is to deliver the goods in service of the city in the cleanest and safest manner using electric vans such as in place in Juarez, or delivering the mail by bicycle in Copenhagen, done in many other cities in Europe. Sixth principle is to mix it up, mix people and activities, which is done here in Albuquerque at a wedding I happened upon in the Old Town Plaza, and in this festival going on in Quito in one of their 5 main plazas. Seventh principle is to fill it in, build dense people and transit-oriented urban districts that are desirable. Steve Price of Urban Advantage took the existing conditions in this photo on top in El Cerrito, California, which is about 5 miles north of Berkeley, and with his nifty software portrays what it could look like filled in. Eighth principle is to get real, that is preserve and enhance the local natural, cultural, social, and historical assets. We have this wonderful system of sequias, ditches throughout New Mexico for farms. The world's limits are that America's oldest form of democracy, because the ditch owners had to work together to make these things happen every year. Ninth is to connect the blocks, so make walking trips more direct, interesting, and productive with small-sized, permeable buildings and blocks. Seaside, Florida, named by Newsweek as the most interesting architecture since Versailles, does an incredible job of allowing one to drive from Memphis, leave their car and never use it again until they leave, because they have such great places to walk and visit in these kinds of streets. So too in Havana, they connect their 5 plazas in their old Havana with streets that are open for traffic until about 10 a.m. and then many of them use that area for sidewalk cafes in the middle of the day. And the final principle brought up by the Institute for Transportation Development Policy is to make it last. Built for the long term, sustainable cities bridge generations. They are memorable, malleable, built from quality materials and well maintained. So the old bank building on the left in Philadelphia is now a happening restaurant. And the home on the right in Taos has been a home for hundreds of years, and they trace back 800 years at least in Taos. Great place to go. And next, I would add an 11th element, a principle, maybe it's because I work on energy efficiency these days, which is to become more energy efficient in how we live, especially in how we get around. Next slide, Sandy. Here's a graph based on data from the Energy Information Agency on energy consumption depending on where and how you live. An auto-dependent lifestyle, as depicted on the leftmost bar, uses 75% more energy than the most compact, walkable household living in a green building, which is the bar on the right. Note that in each of the 4 options, auto-dependent with a green building, a compact development, compact with a green building, energy use is higher for transportation needs than for the home itself. And one more factoid is that over 60% of the growth in driving and associated forms of energy consumption is due to land use factors. So we can try to say that this is all left up to our transportation planners, but in truth, it's still a land use question that it comes down to. Next slide. So this webinar presents 5 different types of community mobility: walking, bicycling, sharing public vehicles, sharing personal vehicles, and driving. There's certainly others like motorcycles and boats, but those are for another day. So I'd ask you during this webinar to send in comments to Brittany that you have about any type of mobility that you're working on in your community, and also suggest planning tools and techniques that have helped expand the use of transportation options in your community. Next slide. First form of mobility is walking, and it's the oldest form of community mobility. Walking as the primary means of transportation is supported by 5,000 years of community settlement patterns the world over. Only in the 20th century did walking become supplanted by mechanical means of mobility. Even today, in the heart of many communities, walking is the preferred method of getting around. Plazas, squares, commons, farmers markets, pocket parks, waterside paths, and pedestrian streets encourage walks, strolls, rambles, conversations that can create neighborliness and a sense of belonging. I was a hoot in Seattle this summer to see this couple walking their dog in a baby stroller. You never know what you're going to see when you're out for a walk. Next slide. The value of walkability is not to be underestimated. People want and are willing to pay more for homes when they can walk or take public transit. A 2007 survey from the National Association of Realtors showed that 83% of Americans support building communities where people can walk more and drive less. We need better housing choices that reflect our diverse needs. The dream of a big house in the suburbs will yield by 2032 the homes in convenient neighborhoods where everything is in walking distance or easy to reach by transit. Such neighborhoods may be more expensive than average now, but by 2032, when supply meets demand and walkability is once again the norm, cost will equalize. Pardon me. Standards in sidewalk size, connections, and street crossings should yield 10-foot wide sidewalks, pedestrian activated signals, and curb extensions at intersections. Beyond the physical changes, mortgage lending should favor walkable neighborhoods as homeowners' monthly spending is lower due to fewer or no private vehicles. The picture on the left is the Playa Vista redevelopment in Los Angeles, the old Howard Hughes Airport, on the west side, where there's 8 times more jobs and housing imbalance. So this is a huge success, helping to redress this imbalance on the west side of LA. On the other side of the LA area, Old Town Pasadena has come roaring back to life by offering lots of walking opportunities in their downtown area of Old Town. Next. People living in walkable areas are 2.5 times as likely as those in least walkable areas to achieve what the Centers for Disease Control recommends, the 30 days of daily physical activity. And beyond these physical benefits are the social aspects. Only when walking can one start a conversation with one person and end it with another. That's the folks back in Otavalo are doing and up in Burlington, Vermont. Next slide. Let me quote Christopher Lineberger, who used to live here in Albuquerque, now is in D.C. with the Brookings Institution. Quote, today there's a huge pent-up demand for higher density development in human-scaled urban places. These places have price premiums that are 40 to 200% higher than the auto-oriented suburban development, the kind of development that has driven the economy into its Great Recession ditch. As Chris noted in the New Republic, September 8, 2010. Next slide. Happening upon a restaurant for a memorable meal is another advantage of walking. Nice, France takes us one step up with a culinary connection of mornings on the Cor Celaya, right a block from the Mediterranean, are devoted to selling spices, produce, and other Mediterranean culinary delights. Then by mid-afternoon, the tables are turned for blocks of outdoor dining choices, which are filled with restaurant goers well into the evening enjoying what chefs picked out that morning. Next slide. My favorite physical space for walking is in New Mexico is the plaza, known elsewhere as a square, green, or place. I found in the heart of many of our communities, walking through a plaza reconnects one with friends and neighbors in a delightful manner as these 4 generations of Taos women are doing in the Taos Plaza on the left, and the couple in the Santo Domingo Plaza are doing in Quito. I know people in Santa Fe who go to the Plaza Extra to walk there every day in a ritualistic manner, a sort of civic exercise. Next slide. Like Barcelona's Las Ramblas, San Francisco's Embarcadero, New York's Times Square now, and Santa Monica's 3rd Street. Havana's El Prado is a great street as an example that gives a priority to the pedestrian. This is the site of the Havana's 17th century wall that bounded and protected the old town. The Spanish made El Prado the street that connected the main park to the sea. So the photo on the right from the old Capitol looks down on the park where Cubans like to talk baseball well into the evening. Old Havana's on the right, and El Prado is the tree-lined street that leads to the Atlantic Ocean. On the left shows a marble walkway and shade trees that together make walking a very pleasurable experience on this street. So that's the first choice of my posit for community mobility. And let's move on to the second one. Bicycling, which extends one's range way beyond the neighborhood to encompass the greater community. For most, community support is essential to design more pleasant and safer bicycling. In fact, such support is crucial if bicycling is to gain ridership beyond the 2% of us in America who ride to work every day. The photo on the left is a Japanese father with his 2 daughters. I took this on a Saturday in Tokyo with a day of celebrating the feast day, hence the dearth of cars in that photo. Usually it would be packed. A photo on top right is of 2 women biking in Cambodia's capital, where bikes are still evident in the face of the onslaught of motorbikes that is typical in many Asian capitals. And the lower right is to save the children worker in Haiti who's proudly displaying the Bridgestone bike we donated to him through the Mobility Haiti project I ran for the Institute of Transportation. We Americans can learn much from other countries and cultures how bicycling can play a more integral role in our commuting alternatives. Next. Let me look at it on the right first. Twin Cities is a great success story for growing bike use in a place that's, frankly, pretty cold for many months of the year. It's the first place in the U.S. to start a bike sharing program, and Minneapolis and St. Paul both take advantage of the greenways they have adjacent to their many lakes and streams to offer bike paths for recreational and commuter purposes. And in 2011, a bicycling magazine named Minneapolis the #1 bike city in the U.S. Their bike percentage of commuters has increased by 1/3 since 2007 and 500% since 1980. Well, it's still only 4% of all commuters, but experience shows, and we'll turn to that shortly, in Europe, that the first few percent are the hardest to achieve. Then you have a glide path at 10, 20, even for 30% of commuters is the hope. In Bogota, sometimes it takes a special event to get somebody to hop on a bike, like a bike to work day. In Bogota, they went one step further and set aside a whole Sunday to ban motor traffic that day. This was done when Enrique Peñalosa was the mayor of Bogota. He didn't know what was going to happen, but hundreds of thousands of people turned out, well above expectations, and now they make this a ongoing event. They've now installed 300 kilometers of bike paths. Bike use is quintupled, up to 400,000 trips made daily in Bogota by bicycle. I remember the planning conference in El Paso in 1999 when Peñalosa spoke to the planners about what he called the politics of happiness. And he had in the neighborhoods what he called the tricycle test, where a 3-year-old could get around safely and happily on a tricycle, and that would be his judge of how well he could be seen as the mayor. And since then, lots of sidewalks have been introduced along with the bike paths to help even the young kids get around in a happy and safe way. Next slide. Bicycling culture. We looked at cities like Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and Freiburg where many bike, but it wasn't always so. Only through conscious planning and budgeting where they transformed from cities as car-centric as any in America to today's pro-bike places we look to for inspiration. In Copenhagen, up to 40% ride every day on a bike. which they see as the fastest and most culturally cool form of transportation. The city spends $30 per resident per year on bicycle infrastructure. In 2008 alone, they installed 5,000 parking stands. The city hall is surrounded by bike parking, and where they had car parking before. By 2015, nearly every resident will readily access a park within a 15-minute walk or 5-minute bike ride. And led by bicycling as well as cars running on the wind-generated electricity, the city aims to be carbon neutral by 2025. Pictured here is a mother toting her happy child. Look at that face in her cargo trike, the Danish SUV. They're using a dedicated bike lane along a major Copenhagen street, separated from motor vehicle traffic in this block by bike parking. The insert on the bottom right is a bike box inspired by Copenhagen and North American settings. So if you want to turn left, you go down and wait in that bike box with green painted, and you have the first right to go next. Next. So Copenhagen is an amazing place. I encourage you to check it out if you have a chance. When I was there for the Climate Conference in 2009, it's really cold. And so we took the train to the conference center, and when we arrived at the station and moved towards the center, we were stopped by Danish police from crossing to allow bike commuters to pass. Now that's social infrastructure. Next. Expanding bike use in communities often means biting the bullet and taking away a lane from cars and dedicating it to bikes. Paris aims to build the world's largest bike sharing program with 435 miles of bike lanes and a social strategy to increase cycling among students, workers, and suburbanites. And in another transformative example on the right here is Vancouver, where they've installed dedicated bike lanes and bike boxes on Dunsmuir Street, one of its busiest downtown streets, increasing downtown cycling tenfold. Google Dunn Street bike lanes for a great video of this project that the Vancouver Bike Planner put together. It's really well done. Includes the features of the mayor. Clearly, such infrastructure is necessary for bicycle commuting to become the norm rather than the exception. Next, we have bicycle-powered people movers. It shows there's various ways to move people, kids and cargo around with the bike. While Asia continues to astound with a variety of ways cargo is transported, here's a couple examples from elsewhere. A cottage industry in the Christina area of Copenhagen, which is actually featured in today's New York Times, makes tricycles for carrying both kids and cargo, seen on the left. And on the right, the Manhattan pedicabs are a quicker way to get around from the theater to the hotel than a regular cab. Finally, on bikes, next slide, maybe by 2032 we'll have what we could call bike boulevards. Meeting an urban commuting goal of 30% commuting bikes can save energy, cut emissions, and attract and retain the creative class, so critical to urban economies. So let's hope to turn these bike boulevards from concept to reality. So that's bicycles. Let's go to the third form of mobility in the communities, sharing public vehicles. That's another way of saying transit, whether bus, train, or trolley. After years of neglect, defunding, and negative stigmatism, transit has come roaring back in many American cities, often in the form of light rail. Public transportation on dedicated spaces of tracks and lanes quickly and easily move large number of passengers. And like the mailman, transit is undeterred no matter the severity of heat, sun, rain, or snow. For infrequent riders who want to try out the bus or train, there's an app for that. Click on Transit Score and you'll figure out how to get from your home to work using the bus or train, as well as compare it to commuting by bike, car, or walking. Next. The subway is very, very expensive, but also does an enormous job of carrying huge numbers of people. As shown on this right, while we were walking out of the metro at the inauguration in 2009, it was packed. Transit in 2032 will be the mobility workhorse in terms of numbers of riders. All other forms of transportation will feed into transit shops. One may get to a transit stop initially by foot or bike or even a shared personal vehicle. Dedicated space for light rail and bus service will be standard operating procedure to greatly increase the speed, safety, and reliability of service. And the vehicles will be powered by their own brakes or nearby renewable sources of electricity. This month's CR Magazine has the latest on train energy technology. Philadelphia Subway is installing this year a 1 megawatt battery to soak up the train's excess wattage created from braking. A smart grid software connects the power to the grid. Many electric trains can have regenerative braking, in their case slowing the trains by spinning an electric motor backwards, producing electricity. Power is sent to an onboard battery for storage or routed down the rails for use of another train that may be accelerating at the same time. In Haifa, Israel, tracks have sensor pads to convert a train's pressure on the rails from mechanical energy into electrical energy. And trains in China, Italy, and Korea are working on capturing the rush of a passing train with miniature wind turbines embedded in cross ties or in the walls of rail tunnels. Now on to streetcars and light rail. Streetcars were placed in every U.S. community over 5,000 population in the 1880s in the same time as fast as the internet was installed in the 1990s. They're now coming back in dozens of cities. Newark, Norfolk, Oceanside, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Portland, Sacramento, St. Louis, Salt Lake City, Santa Fe, wish it was Santa Fe, San Diego, San Francisco, San Jose, Seattle, and Tacoma, according to Wikipedia. Probably more. Next. Lots of different streetcar designs out there. Nice, France is one of the dozens of cities worldwide embracing streetcars. Freiburg has extended its streetcar lines out to the suburbs to include the Vauban redevelopment on the right here, which is an old French military base that's been converted into a very new urbanism type of a redevelopment. Having a rail there allows entire families to forgo their own cars. We stay with a family there, a row of 16 homes. Of those, 15 did not have a car. They did not need one. The young kids skipped and hopped across the tracks to go to their kindergarten. The third grader got to school on the rail. Pops took a bike, and the mom worked at home. It can be done. Next. There's a few examples of what's called personal rapid transit out there, including the Heathrow Airport in London. So if you go to the Olympics, check it out. On Terminal 5, they have a network of up to 18 driverless pods that ferry people between the main terminal and its car parks. Each pod is controlled by an internal computer and onboard sensor systems. So this type of transit offers public transport with the privacy of a car, so they say. For starters, there's no timetable. Visitors to a network should find pods waiting for them, making it more like a taxi than a bus stop. Maximum waiting time to a terminal is 12 seconds. And there's no stops. They don't pick up any other passengers. There's no traffic lights. You're always guaranteed a seat even in peak hours. Once inside the pod, you pick your destination and travel about 20 miles an hour. On alighting, the pod waits for the next fare or is automatically rerouted where there's most demand. Thus it waits for you rather than you waiting for it. On the right is Morgantown, West Virginia's personal rapid transit system. It's been in place for 35 years. I think probably thank former Senator Robert Byrd for the money for this, connecting the downtown of Morgantown with the West Virginia University campus. Masdar City, Abu Dhabi's new post-petroleum city, will be free of automobiles and use personal rapid transit as electric taxis, as the promise for that place. What's more common is what's called bus rapid transit, which started in Curitiba, Brazil as a brainchild of then Mayor Jaime Lerner, is provide the type of experience you get from the subway with a fraction of the cost. And since then, they've spread to many cities around the world, such as Bogota, Mexico City, even Los Angeles, to the north part of the city, Seattle, Boston, Tehran, Johannesburg, Cape Town, Abidjan, Jersey City, to name a few. At a fraction of the cost of the subway, riders enjoy a subway-like experience at street level. On the left is the Rio Coco station in Quito, the new town of Quito, new town section of Quito, I should say. The gentleman is just getting off the bus, coming into the station, and the couple in the middle is waiting for the bus to come in on the right. For 25 cents, they take American currency. You can get a very rapid ride from the new town to the old town on the right. It's the Santo Domingo stop in Old Town. They're celebrating a festival there outside the station. Great service. I was very impressed. And, some cities compromise by putting bus rapid transit lanes in with other traffic lanes. It's far better to bite the bullet and make the expenditure to completely separate the lanes. And if Quito, a 16th century city, can do it, so could our young American cities. Next, the overhead transit is something to look for, literally, up in the air. Funiculars is the one depicted on the left in Bergen. Cable cars and gondolas to come to an increasing number of communities aiming for a higher level of transit service, pun intended. Portland's aerial tram links the South Waterfront to Oregon Health Sciences campus. A private operating company does this, and they carry 3,500 riders per day and link to streetcars, bus, and other modes of transit at the bottom. Next is used by locals and tourists alike. Gondolas and cable cars can climb the steepest mountains from Genoa in Italy to San Francisco. They offer mobility to mountain communities, river cities, and coast-hugging birds throughout the world. By 2032, many more such terrain-challenged communities will embrace these forms of public transportation. Telluride gondolas on the left are not just for skiers. They literally connect the town with a mountain village where many service workers live. As a bonus, every third car allows dogs. So my dog's here is waiting for that third car to come by so she can hop on and get up to the slopes, where we had a great time. The incline 4th Street elevator in Dubuque, where was my hometown, also provides transportation for hilltop residents working or shopping downtown. A lot of great memories of that one. Next is how do you feel the public transportation, which is a great thing to have, and it's even greater if it's running on renewable fuels. Electric-powered buses, subways, and utility vehicles can use regenerative braking technology for some of its power. Solar power is depicted on the left from a charging station in Portland, Oregon, is another source. Storage of solar, wind, and geothermal offers huge potential for meeting electric-powered transit fleets. And you should all come out here to Albuquerque, where we have two of the world's first solar storage facilities under testing right now. For liquid fuels, look up for the answer in Malmo, Sweden, anyhow, where the tower's residents, this 42-story building, along with other apartment dwellers in Malmo, send food scraps through a vacuum system into a digester. The resulting biogas powers about half the city's buses, and they have plans to fuel all its fleet with this method of renewable form of energy by 2016. That's for sharing public vehicles. The fourth form of mobility is sharing private vehicles. I predict this will be the biggest change in mobility in the next 20 years. Personal, in this case, means you drive a car or bicycle as a member of a sharing program. Today, there are many car and bike sharing programs operating around the world, and I think by 2032, no self-respecting community will be without them. Next, we have bike sharing in many cities around the world. And I experienced them hugely successful in places such as Paris, Montreal, Oslo, and in Washington. In Washington, the cities joined with Arlington County, Virginia, to jointly create the nation's largest bike sharing program with 110 stations offering 1,500 bicycles to its members and visitors. And an app can tell you by smartphone which docking stations has either bikes for use or spaces to dock the bike you're using. When I was there in May, it was amazing to have that app and know exactly which station to go to and which ones, oh, they're not going to have bikes, I might as well go to the next one. Nearly 100 universities across the U.S. now offer bike sharing to their students, treating the transaction akin to checking out a library book. Some schools are able to tighten up on students bringing their own cars to campus without compromising local mobility. Next, our bike docking stations, they have standardized look now. On Oslo on the right, they're sponsored by a detergent, and they're sponsored in London by Barclays Bank. In Montreal, they're sponsored by Public Works. They don't have that kind of writing on them. Montreal worked out a lot of the kinks from the Paris, the lead program, and have really got a great system. Next, I think the next step for bike sharing would be have electric bikes. This is me and my electric bike that I share with my wife. Electric bikes are a natural fit for both car and bike sharing programs, and they offer the promise of offering even further mobility through a city because of the extended range they offer. There's already 100 million electric bikes in China compared to 18 million Chinese cars. Adding electric cars to a fleet means that solar charging stations for both electric cars and bikes can't be far behind. So let's hope by 2032 such a bike and car sharing program should be widespread and powered with electricity, at least in part. Let's go on to car sharing programs. This has really caught on in many places. Philadelphia's car share claims to reduce the need for 14 parking spaces for every car in its fleet. The Philadelphia city government, as a member of this program, has reduced its own vehicle fleet by 1/3. An analysis of car sharing programs in North America shows them flourishing. Car sharing program members cut their household car ownership in half, and gas mileage of cars in this program is improved by 10 miles a gallon by they choosing more efficient cars. And the median age of cars shed from members is 11 years, so they really getting rid of a lot of clunkers. The result, to quote the analysis, is, quote, has been a new transportation landscape which offers urban residents an alternative to automobility without car ownership, unquote. Hoboken, New Jersey, Corner Cars program puts its cars at many of its city's corners. This program, which is jointly sponsored by City Hall and Hertz, uses dedicated on-street parking dispersed throughout the city, so nearly all residents are no more than 5 minutes away from a car. Could buy expensive car insurance for a car that sits idle most of the day. Hello, $5 per hour user rates. Could buy 750 cars no longer needed, nor structured parking lots that eat up the city's bond ratings. Hello to one more mobility option. Let's hope Hoboken adds corner cars along with Frank Sinatra as a big export hit. The goal of each personal vehicle sharing program, according to a major study of the best sharing programs in Europe and U.S., is, quote, to provide exactly what private car ownership does: freedom of movement, flexibility, and convenience. Such sharing programs can quickly and efficiently offer additional sustainable transportation choices, thus making the decision not to own a personal car more attractive and clearing the way for an integrated, sustainable urban transport system, unquote. Paris has taken the next step in car sharing by imitating the lead bike sharing program with Autolead. Members can go from point A to point B in the Paris metropolitan region without having to go back to point A. Point A is now is required in most car sharing programs. Next slide. Getaround is a new company in California that aims to enable sharing of the 250 personal vehicles in the U.S. that sit unused 93% of the time. By enlisting the underused cars in countless driveways and parking spaces, Getaround can jumpstart a fleet of millions of shared and rentable cars without adding more vehicles to the road. Getaround uses in-vehicle hardware and native smartphone applications to ensure a seamless car sharing experience. So let's see if this takes off. All right, that's the entry into the final form of mobility. One we all know, driving. By 2032, the free market will dictate that drivers pay the real cost of driving. For example, free parking will be much scarcer in 2032, if not a thing of the past. Zoning will decouple the housing unit and the business to the parking space. And any parking space would be optimally used as a place to generate electricity that would be stored and fed into electric cars as needed. When peak electric demands require it, the flow and the fare would be reversed to feed power stored in car batteries back into the grid. This photo shows a Better Place, nonprofit based in Palo Alto and Jerusalem, car battery swapping station now in place in China and Japan this year. Others are being installed in Israel and Denmark, with more planned for Hawaii and the Bay Area. It's too soon to tell which kind of electric battery recharging platform will emerge, and time will tell. So by 2032, we certainly will know. Next. And we don't know what they look like either. It's anyone's guess. It's an example of a Peugeot prototype in the Champs-Élysées showroom in Paris, and the Think car, electric car, in the streets of Oslo. New mileage standards set forth by US DOT mean that the average gas-powered car will be getting 54.5 miles per gallon by 2025. Electric vehicles can help the corporate fleet meet that standard with mileage equivalent to well over 100 miles per gallon. So things will be changing. Next. On the left is an artist's rendering of a carbon capturing field. Kind of follows the kind of power plant idea or thinking of producing a good in one centralized facility. In this case, the good is capturing carbon and getting it out of the air. We're now at the cusp in the energy field of seeing 1,000 flowers bloom concept take hold. Again, taking inspiration from Denmark, which has gone from 12 centralized power plants in 1979 to 12,000 facilities producing electricity today, most of them from windmills and combined heat and power plants. So from going from a microgrid to, from a macro to a microgrid thinking. So too in transportation, can we envision every form of mobility doing its part? So instead of cars emitting 20 pounds of carbon dioxide per mile, as is typically the case now, carbon capturing cars will fill a holding tank that's swapped out at unfilling stations with the captured carbon handled as other hazardous pollutants. Thus, just as the home and office of 2032 will generate more green energy than fossil energy used, the 2032 car will run on renewable power and absorb carbon while emitting none. So how do we plan mobility transformation? Next slide. Going from an oil-addicted air to a time in 20 years when complete community mobility choices are offered requires a great deal of planning, resulting in major policy and budgeting changes. It also means reinventing how we connect transportation and land use. Todd Littman, who I visited last July in Victoria with the Victoria Policy Transport Institute, offers the following options. Road pricing that charges users directly for road use with rates that reflect cost imposed. Parking pricing that charges users directly for parking facility use, often with variable rates. A parking cash out that offers commuters financial incentives for using alternative modes. Pay-as-you-drive pricing that converts fixed vehicle charges into mileage-based fees. Fuel taxes and tax shifting that increases fuel taxes and other vehicle taxes. And finally, smart growth policies that offer more accessible multimodal land use development patterns. Similarly, Barbara McCann and Reed Ewing proposed through Smart Growth America 7 policies for changing what they described in the transportation planning parlance as mode shift. 1, invest in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. 2, calm traffic. 3, create safe routes to school. 4, build transit-supported development. 5, retrofit sprawling neighborhoods. 6, revitalize walkable neighborhoods. And 7, educate and encourage the public. Better community and regional planning that builds on these 5 mobility choices benefits the economy, society, and environment alike. A triple bottom line. Next. So the prize is how do we how do we enjoy our communities in a healthier way, I guess. One way to look at it, Champaign-Urbana, Illinois has adopted a 20-year transportation plan. And it's already been implemented and making great strides towards offering many mobility choices for its residents. Already cleaning up the sidewalks, as you can see here. Once fully implemented, the plan hopes to achieve the following: create higher population density and less sprawl, promote alternative transportation modes, create walkable activity centers and reduce reliance on the car, make travel safer for pedestrians and bicyclists, increase mobility for motorists, educate residents about alternative transportation modes, safety, and new transportation concepts. So let me close my portion of the webinar by back to Santa Fe and St. Michael's Drive. I showed you early on, 6-lane boulevard with a turning lane in the middle. And we at the Santa Fe Planning Commission and staff are wrestling with how to transform this street from a third-rate street to a first-rate boulevard. Again, Steve Price's task to help envision this glimpse into the future. Next. So if the public investment has to go first, is done, what would it yield? At planning meetings we've held in Santa Fe, we met with property owners, and invariably the question comes up, what's the city going to do? In other words, they're not going to invest a dime until they know what the public investment's going to be, what it's going to look like. What it needs to look like is make sure that invest in infrastructure that accommodates all 5 forms of mobility. Next slide. So then the private investment will follow. And it could be 8 times, 10 times, 12 times more money than the public, but the public money has to go first. And then they will build buildings, 1 to 2 stories, 3 stories, which is a lot in Santa Fe, to the zero lot line, and put parking in the back to supplement what's up in front. Next slide. And that'll attract more people and more shoppers. Finally, last slide is a fully built out street that'll be irresistible to visit, shop, and live there as much as possible. So here you can see 4 of the 5 forms of mobility. If we assume that Prius on the right is a shared car, and they're just waiting for the bus. You all 5. Next, penultimate slide. So life in the slow lane may be the ticket for mobility in 2032. When bikes outpace cars consistently, when streetcars become cool ways to get around, and when walking means a chance to mix it up in pedestrian zones with one's peers as well as complete strangers and have a great time to boot, I look forward to 2032. And now, thank you, and I look forward to your comments. Back to you, Brittany.
All right, great. Thanks, Ken. All right, so any questions you can type in the questions box, and we'll be taking those for the next 30 minutes. We've got a couple comments so far, Ken, from Vasu. He says, this webinar rules. From John, this was a comment, I think, based on your question in the beginning about types of mobilities, and his comment is that another type of mobility is the substitution of communications for transportation, e.g. this webcast.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about a couple times about apps, and there are definitely ways to use communication to substitute for transportation. This webinar is an example. I mean, I commuted down from Santa Fe, but everybody else here is from Albuquerque and wherever you are in the country or at your own computer. So it's a really good point that we don't have to get into vehicles as much as we used to in order to do what we need to do on a daily basis.
All right. Well, so our first question comes in from Bill. How do you decide which electric bike to buy?
Or if you're like me, just go to a street fair in Tucson and see which one comes up first, and it's an impulse buy. But certainly some research is in order. It depends on what your needs are. My electric bike is an electric assist. It's only, I think, top out at 15 miles an hour. It's not very fast. I keep pedaling at the same time as I use the throttle to go up any hills. So it really depends on your own circumstance. If you're using it for commuting, you got some really heavy hills, you probably want to invest more in the $1,500 to $2,000 range. My bike was around $850, so the hills in Santa Fe are not too daunting. So it depends on your circumstance.
All right. Well, our next question comes in from Joanna. Is there a role for the Segway?
Segue over into that. I would, you know, when it came out, that was to be a game changer, and I don't think it's turned out to be. It certainly has a niche for those who find that form of transportation a good option. I've only seen a few for commuters in Washington, D.C. on 17th Street to get down from Meadows Morgan down through DuPont Circle. I saw a woman with her purse dangling from the handlebars using a Segway, but I haven't seen them very often, but others may want to comment on whether they think they'll increase in use and popularity more than a very specialized object.
All right. Our next question comes in from Charles. Do you think the federal government will support this transformation, and won't the deficit problem slow things down?
I think the federal government, under the leadership of the current DOT Secretary, Ray LaHood, has made great strides towards accommodating other forms of transportation. He went to a meeting, the League of American Bicyclists, I used to be on their board, and got up on a chair and was extolling the virtues of bicycling. Everybody was wonderfully amazed about his support for bicycling. He's had different initiatives that have supported complete streets and other policies that are pro mobility options, put it that way. But you're right, the resistance has come back, and it's hard to see where in the near future we can make a lot of headway. But most good ideas percolate up from the bottom, and the top will embrace them when they see a parade form.
All right. Well, our next question comes in from Sherry. What older major metropolitan areas have overcome the difficult challenges of converting narrow, heavily traveled arterials into complete streets?
I'll be glad to suggest that people who live in those communities type in their nominations. I may visit a lot of places, but I haven't been everywhere. Having said that, I don't think that narrow and older streets in communities is a deterrent from being a complete street. I did show a slide of the street in Havana that's really narrow and offers public transportation, private transportation in the mornings and closes off for diners in the middle of the day. Brussels, Belgium has a wonderful narrow streets walking around that are delightful. Many European cities are like that. Montreal, also in North America, have narrow cobblestone streets in the old town that they know sharing streets is almost a way of life. Delft in Holland and Newcastle in England have made a purpose of taking down signs and changing the cobblestone and the pavement. So if you're driving there, you feel like you shouldn't be, even though you're allowed to be, and that by itself helps really slow the traffic down quite a bit, so that the driver does know that the priority goes to the pedestrian. So it can be done without a lot of signs, as we tend to overdo in America.
All right, Ken, we have a couple comments about your question on the segways. Joanna says that they've used the segways in the hills of San Francisco with regenerative braking and around the Dartmouth campus. And Lawrence suggests that segways are used in retail malls in Florida for the security staff.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Our next question comes in from Chris Brown. What advice would you give to existing suburban communities built around automobile usage? Or another way, how can a road-dominant community transition to alternative modes?
That is a very good question. And we're trying to help figure out how to transform suburban settings to make them more energy efficient, and the same thing comes up with transportation. If there's any way to densify them, adding mother-in-law flaps, that's one way to do that, so that you have more people there. Then public forms of shared vehicles can make more economic sense. Maybe that's where electric bikes, electric cars can play a bigger role too, because if you can extend the range of where it's now a little too much to commute by bike, an electric assist wouldn't be a bad idea. But I certainly welcome other comments on that one. That's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, it is. Our next question comes in from Ryan, a little bit on the same kind of topic. Do you see car sharing being something that can work in suburban areas with high driving mode shares?
I think car sharing, particularly by the get-around company's idea of sharing underused cars, which most cars are, might be a way to go, where you sign up within a neighborhood to allow your bike to be rented by others. Might make the most practical sense, at least starting out. And so people get comfortable sharing their own vehicle. And then maybe people would pitch in to pool to buy one car, and then use an app for renting it or sharing it, use it in certain times. I live in a causing community in Santa Fe. We've been toying with that idea of getting one car and then using our own intranet to parcel it out as people go to the shop or schools or other places that we could all use it in the same place. So it's a lot of that comes down to management.
All right. Well, our next question, a little bit on the same note. Have you had any experience with rural small towns that are not extremely dense, and if so, what has been done?
Small towns in New Mexico have had some success with putting in some sidewalks where none existed before, and bike lanes, the same. And rural bus service has been offered in some places. We have a Navajo chapter really remote in central New Mexico that has bus service and allows people to get to the next community, like Socorro, New Mexico. And that makes it possible for many more people to be able to commute to work and to schools that otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity.
All right, our next question comes in from Michael. Do you have any examples of communities that have used creative financing to fund infrastructure projects in this environment of no federal earmarks and diminishing federal transportation dollars?
Creative financing is definitely something to pursue, given what's happening with less and less funds coming in from the federal government. I can only point to the energy field where I work. I don't, as I said, don't work in the transportation field itself, where we're looking at bonds and using on-bill financing for paying for energy efficiency and solar improvements. I think that kind of an approach could work for paying for at least sharing of vehicles and getting some kind of upfront financing system set up to pay for shared vehicles. As far as infrastructure, that cost is well beyond that kind of approach. But in terms of individuals or a group of individuals in a community setting, that approach might work.
All right. Well, our next question comes in from Cindy. What policy changes need to be made to promote electric cars and buses as transportation means? Federal, state, and local level policies.
The annual expense on gasoline in America approaches $500 billion a year. Or no, I'm sorry, 300 billion. I was exaggerating there. Utility companies know that, and they know that also the amount of electricity use is flattening, if not declining. So it's a huge growth potential for utilities. They also know that a carbon-constrained world is inevitable, and that switching over towards alternatives has to be done. So there is some incentives for utilities to provide some battery swapping stations and the like. That's what they're doing in China. Aggressively, the utilities in China are offering free swap outs of batteries. So again, we may need to look to other places around the world for inspiration.
All right. Our next question is from Armando. It's a little bit on the same note as far as shared vehicles. How is personal liability insurance responsibility handled in shared vehicles? Are there rental fees, including insurance?
That's a good question. I've been wrestling it out myself. As I mentioned, where I live, we haven't been able to overcome that. You need to work with the insurance agents. If it's not offered in your state, you may have to change the state law, allowing many people to share the bike and have insurance coverage go with. But again, that's a fairly technical detail that can be overcome. Just a little persistence will pay off, I think, in getting insurance coverage.
All right. Our next question comes in from JP. It seems leveraging existing and growing bicycle clubs/groups by networking them into local and regional coalitions to put political pressure on local governments is a possible beginning strategy to mitigate the car-based culture and environment. Is your organization involved this way?
That's a long and good question. Yeah, political pressure on local governments is always needed. As I said, no politician is going to start a parade; they'll join it, and so you need to put the pressure on. We have a bond coming up in Santa Fe in March that has quite a bit of money in it if it passes for improving the bicycle infrastructure in Santa Fe. And the city council meeting had lots of people asking for support for different causes. The most people who came out were with the bike coalition in Santa Fe, and that really made a difference in getting the city council to support the passage of the bond on the March ballot.
All right. Our next question comes in from Daniel. Ken, what are your thoughts on water taxis and its feasibility in waterside and canal communities, or is the water taxi confined to tourism or sightseeing?
I think, as I said it during the presentation of the webinar, there are other forms of transportation besides the 5 that I talked about, such as motorcycles and water vehicles. I would think water taxis can play a huge role. In fact, they already do in places like the Staten Island Ferry, which is hugely successful. And the ferry service between Bainbridge Island and Seattle is wonderful, 20 minutes. And other places that have water taxi and ferry service, and it certainly makes a difference in places that are waterbound. I think they're more the exception than the rule, because most, interesting geographically, water does separate communities politically. Then, so I really emphasize more of the community settings than out connecting different communities. North Vancouver and Vancouver is connected by taxis too, so I do think they play an important role, but it's more of a niche. Just as the gondolas are niche, but they can play an important role where they are needed. The Bay Area is another place they use them quite often.
All right, our next question comes in from Joan. Is there an existing clearinghouse for model ordinances that support the transportation goals you have been talking about today? For example, parking restrictive zoning or PUD and mixed-use land development guidelines?
Sorry? Yeah, you have to Google that one. There probably are. T for America might have them. Pardon me? Urban Land Institute, very good example. If you remember ULI. Also, the Planning Advisory Service, the APA, should have those in spades. If you remember, if not, it's worth joining because they can do that research.
All right, our next question comes in from Michael. Are there any examples of policies in U.S. cities that have allowed for the installation of EV charging stations in the public right-of-way, for instance, along the street?
Yes, I've heard of those, that they're starting to come into play. Even here in Albuquerque, they have a electric vehicle charging station, and many of them actually will be put forward by private companies. They just need the right-of-way to install them, either along the street or in a parking garage. And more you'll start to see those also in private parking lots in front of major retailers, who see that as a great way for people to take a little longer, maybe 2 hours instead of 1 hour in a mall, because their charging station is keeping their car literally anchored there while it gets charged up.
All right, our next question comes in from Matthew. What is the effect on the economy if people stop buying cars?
That's a good question because it is a major part of our economy, but there's no research that would suggest that people will just sit on their money. It'll be spent in other ways, and you should also note that our current way we spend on our vehicles in large part does not really help the economy because there's offsetting costs. For instance, what Michael Repologos, I mentioned at the beginning, was my co-founder of Institute for Transportation Development Policy, a long time ago did an analysis of expenditures on cars. And if you spend $10 on gasoline and putting it in your car, $8.50 leaves the local economy. If you spend $10 on a bus pass, that recycles 3.5 times in the local economy. So it depends on how that money is used, and I don't think that we are going to have a great depression because of fewer cars being bought. That money will be used elsewhere and help the economy in different ways.
All right. Back on the question from Michael about the charging stations, Cindy has commented that the City of Orlando and Winter Park, Florida have or will install charging stations this year. They will go they will go in the public right-of-way or public-owned lands.
Great.
Let's see. Our next question also comes in from Cindy. What happens to all of the cars we now have in the year 2030?
Well, I think most cars are used for a good 10 years, so the cars we have now will not be around. They'll be scrap metal. I don't know if that's the question, or are you asking what the cars will look like in 2032? I think I tried to show you that's anyone's guess what we're going to have for cars. I mean, we've seen quite a few changes. The fact that we're going to have much higher mileage suggests that we'll have cars that look like the ones now in many instances a lot smaller and lighter. But I would hope that we do a lot better job of how we use the cars, or put it this way, how we use all forms of vehicles. And if anything, I wanted to leave with folks today, it's just the message that we need to do a much better job of sharing our vehicles and get out of this notion that we can only have our private vehicle to get around. We can get around our communities quite nicely and not sacrifice mobility at all if we embrace all 5 ways to get around.
All right. Well, the last question I have so far, unless we get some more in, what do you think about the chance of electric power being reintroduced for public transportation? Are electric engines for powering buses and light rail achievable in the near future?
Yeah, as I mentioned in this month's Sierra Magazine, they did mention some of the technology that's coming along and bringing back electric technology to power public transit vehicles. And they may not be the old electric lines, and that's fine. They didn't look too good. They had those overhead lines. So we'll see what happens, but it certainly embrace some new technologies, and hopefully they will help us to avoid the exhaust fumes of the current transit options.
Brittany, we had a question here in Albuquerque.
Okay, go ahead.
We had a question that with the idea of doing more share vehicles, share rides vehicles.
The question is, when there's more sharing programs, is there a decrease in taxi use? Yeah, I know when the airports have subways extended into them, or that it comes up, the taxi drivers just organize and fight it like crazy, and that's why you fly into some of the Narita Airport in Tokyo or Shanghai. They're like ultra modern. They have, Shanghai, I guess, has this express that goes 200 miles an hour, gets you downtown in 20 minutes. In LA, yeah, they have a new light rail, but you got to get outside the LA airport to get to it. Are you kidding me? You got to get a cab to get to the light rail. Otherwise, you walk 45 minutes. So something's got to give. It's an example with buying pure cars. Over time, economically, people will find other ways to have a job. But LaGuardia Airport in New York, don't get me started. That's awful. I mean, why there's not subway service to these places is a criminal situation compared to any other major city in the world. So I'm not sympathetic to the cab drivers, I guess.
All right, we received another question from Rush. What about the balancing act for light rail versus funding urban buses? Are we shortchanging bus funding for the transit-dependent community in favor of trains that carry few riders?
Actually, I don't think trains carry few riders. They carry a lot of riders. This is a great example of where you need to look at the land use side. No developer will invest enormous amounts of money outside of a bus stop. They will if it's a train stop. So one should look at devices such as a TID, TOD, transit-oriented development, coming around with financing from that development to make that light rail happen. So you don't have to shortchange the buses, but you do need to redevelop where people live and work, so that you have situations such as in Arlington, Virginia, that has these huge density around their metro stops, which then go out within a half mile. You're back to Ozzie and Harriet suburban type development. But you have the subway and light rail stops can make an enormous difference in attracting private investment around them, to the degree that you could also figure out how to finance the rail itself. You can't do that with a bus. A bus rapid transit offers that because you can treat that as a subway stop. As I showed you in Quito, that's the way they are, and it really makes a difference in attracting private investment. I think that's the key difference in those. So you shouldn't have to shortchange buses if you use private investment to help pay for the infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure around in the light rail neighborhoods. I hope that makes sense.
All right, well, I think that is all the questions we have for you today, Ken. Thank you so much for presenting. It was a really great presentation. Also, Ken has mentioned that his paper on community mobility is available on his website, and that's just kenhughes.org. So
Right.
Go check that out. All right, well, for those of you who are still in attendance, I'm going to go through a few reminders about submitting your CM credits for attending today. So thank you again, Ken and Sandy, for putting on this great presentation.
You're welcome. Did I rush that too much?
I think you're okay. All right, well, for those of you who are still in attendance, I'm going to go over logging your CM credits. You can go to www.planning.org/CM and select today's date, which is Friday, January 13th, and then select today's webcast, Community Mobility. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. Also, we are recording today's session, so you will be able to find a recording of this webcast along with a 6-slide per page PDF at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. This does conclude today's session, and I want to thank everyone again for attending.